All right, it's time for Red Rain episode 149. Let's welcome in your host, Walter Mitchell.
Thank you, Kyle Little Rock Ledbetter, and who's now in Slam Diego, um, working on his dad's house. And I offer Kyle my deepest condolences for losing his dad last week, and he and his brother have been down there, kind of, working on the house, and it's going to be a rough week, but he's here. Um, to do this podcast with us, and really, really appreciate it. I know it's been a tough time, and um, you know, my prayers and thoughts are with you and your family as you grieve your dad's passing. And
Yes, thank you very much for that, Walter, as well. I know we've been navigating this for a lot of the last week, but it's been a journey that I've been on for the last 8 to 10 years of my life. And,
right,
you know, unfortunately, my dad did die last week. So we're all navigating that situation.
yes, well, you're handling it with such class and aplomb. I'm incredibly impressed, and it's as any of us who've lost a parent know, it's a really difficult, no matter what your circumstances are, difficult process to go through. So we're just very grateful you're here with us today, and we can forge forward with Red Rain.
Yes,
So
and thank you for all your support over the last it's really closer to 2 weeks now, but thank you for all of your support over the last 2 weeks as well.
my pleasure, man. There's only one Little Rock in my universe, and you are it. So um, today we're going to talk. We're going to do an NFC West preview. We've got all sorts of notes and thoughts, and what I thought we'd do is start with talking about the changes in coaching in the division, and we've got a little graphic for you to run through, and I'm going to read the changes and ask Kyle what his thoughts are, and then I'll chime in with mine. But there's been significant change in the other three for the other three teams. With the Cardinals, they have retained their coaching staff from last year and not added anyone so of significance. The Rams now have Mike LaFleur as their offensive coordinator. Will be working in conjunction with Sean McVay. Of course, LaFleur was the Jets OC last couple of years. They have Chris Shula as the DC. He was their linebackers coach, so he takes over for Keem Morris, but they hired a defensive senior assistant in Sean Desai, who was with the Eagles, and then they tabbed Chase Blackburn as their special teams coach, who was the Tennessee assistant special teams coach. I imagine that he came um, uh, as the recommendation from the GM over there, who is the 49ers, Rand Carthon. That's probably the tie they had there. Kyle, what do you think of these Rams changes?
So, Mike LaFleur coming over as offensive coordinator is interesting given things didn't quite go the way that we thought they would with the Jets. I mean, I remember Mike LaFleur was up and coming offensive mind. You know, he's the one of the guys of the Shanahan tree, came up with the 49ers. When Robert Saleh takes the New York Jets job, he naturally follows to New York, and he's kind of the guy running the offense, and Saleh is going to be the guy running the defense. And it didn't quite work out the way that they hoped it would. And then when they bring in Aaron Rodgers, they bring Nathaniel Hackett along with Aaron Rodgers, kind of, they're kind of buddy from their time together in Green Bay. So I'm curious to see how Mike LaFleur as the offensive coordinator works for the Rams. I just don't know exactly how they are going to put everything together
Right.
this upcoming season. And the Rams losing I think Raheem Morris is a big having him no longer be the defensive coordinator is going to make a difference for the Rams, and particularly because most of their most of their hires on the defense were promoting people internally. Obviously, Sean Desai comes in after the tumultuous run with the Philadelphia Eagles, where at one point I think he was replaced by Matt Patricia mid-season as the defensive coordinator, and it was a really, really tough year for Sean, and put in a tough position because of all the Vic Fangio stuff, and obviously Jonathan Gannon not communicating to the Eagles exactly whether he would take the Cardinals job or not take the Cardinals job. And so Desai was kind of put in a tough position with the Eagles. So I think him coming in will be fine, but most of the defensive decision makers for the Rams are internal promotions, like Chris Shula as the defensive coordinator. And obviously the biggest issue beyond Morris leaving is that Aaron Donald is retired, and Aaron Donald was the anchor of everything that they were doing on defense for
Right.
damn near a decade. So I'm really curious to see how this all fits together for the Rams. I trust Sean McVay, and I trust that they have talented players on that roster, but it's a curious fit with the people that they're bringing in, and I'm interested to see how it all blends together. They're definitely the biggest question mark of the division, and that's interesting to say given how the Seahawks have a completely new coaching staff and the Rams coordinators still feel like more of question marks in a way.
Right. I was surprised that Brandon Staley wasn't hired to come back. Um, I mean, that's something Belichick would do with a Super Bowl winning head coach who's one of his coordinators defects. I mean, Staley was a huge part in the Rams' success under McVay, and but as we transition to the 49ers, he winds up the assistant head coach of defense and focused on defense, senior advisor with the 49ers, and who promoted Nick Sorensen to DC over, at once Steve Wilkes was relieved of his duties. He was the Niners defensive passing game specialist, and he's done a pretty good job with their secondary. And then Mike Lombardi was added as a senior offensive assistant. He was the OC with the Raiders the last 2 years. So some fortifications there and some other guys with experience. Your thought?
So when the 49ers made the move to fire Steve Wilkes, I was surprised that they jumped the gun as much as they did based on performance. It seemed like Wilkes kind of had some issues with some players in the locker room potentially, but I was surprised based on performance that they made the move because they were so late in the hiring process. I mean, they fired Wilkes after the Super Bowl when pretty much every team had already filled their coordinator position. And I remember people were saying like they're going to go get Mike Vrabel to come in and be defensive coordinator. They're going to go get Bill Belichick to come in and be defensive coordinator. And I was like, I don't think the 49ers have that level of ability to just go out and get any old coach of the year coach to be willing to come and coach their defense and not necessarily come in as a head coach. And that ultimately proved to be true because Chris Kasarik was kind of the natural replacement in terms of if you're looking for an internal promotion
Right.
kind of person.
Yep.
It seemed like Chris Kasarik wasn't necessarily wanting to leave that defensive line unit to be the defensive play caller and didn't feel like he was ready to be a true defensive play caller. And so they have this kind of weird hybrid of Nick Sorensen and Brandon Staley are going to be the defensive coaches for next year. And it feels like, again, interpersonal stuff with Steve Wilkes played some of a factor in his firing, but it doesn't feel like the patchwork of Sorensen with Brandon Staley as an advisor, because Staley has some defensive play calling experience compared to Sorensen. it doesn't feel like this patchwork option is necessarily better than Steve Wilkes, but it wasn't necessarily just Steve Wilkes's performance necessarily. And Shanahan wasn't ready to really relinquish control of the defense because he likes to have his fingerprints on everything that the team does, and he wasn't ready to relinquish that control to a new person internally or from outside the organization.
Yeah. Yeah, I was surprised that they just didn't name Brandon Staley the DC. But he's there. He'll be working in coordination with Nick Sorensen. Um, I think that's a major get for them. Staley has had Super Bowl success, so um, you know, I think that's a major hire for them, and I think they, if there may be good improvements on that side of the ball um, in nuanced ways because that was a really good defense last year for sure. Um, but um, but there were, and you pointed out so well they played a heck of a first, 3.5 quarters in the Super Bowl against Mahomes and company. So uh, Wilkes has been on the path of the tornado, alas, too often thus far in his career. But he's so resilient. He's like the epitome of resiliency. So we're going to wish him luck. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they make out. Plus, with the fallout usually from having to go that deep into a season and deal with a super painful Super Bowl loss, OT loss, how they're going to be able to hold up physically this year in light of all the games they played last year. We'll get to their personnel in a minute, but um, it's going to be interesting to see if the 49ers can regroup and really get after this. They're the prohibitive favorites in the NFC, and whether they can live up to that is going to be interesting. With the Seahawks, of course, Pete Carroll was out, even though he won his last game against the Cardinals in rather curious fashion. And in is Mike McDonald of the Doobie Brothers. What a fool believes. Oh, excuse me, Mike McDonald from the Baltimore Ravens. Um, those of you who are my age probably remember Mike McDonald on the keyboards. What a fool believes. He was the first Mike McDonald I ever, bought an album for. But we're going to see if Mike McDonald can, play some sweet songs as a head coach in Seattle. They've been really under the radar. Love his hire of Leslie Frazier as an assistant head coach, and to be a head coach, a defensive-minded head coach, to have that kind of an experienced coordinator in the building with you to help you coordinate while you're being head coach, I think is a brilliant move. I think the biggest wild card hire of this cycle was Ryan Grubb, the Washington OC, who did just an incredible job with the Huskies the last 2 years and opened up that offense in ways that it's never been run. It's particularly in the vertical passing game, which I think is going to be very fascinating to watch because I think Geno Smith is made for that in certain ways, and they have the receiving core that's made for that. And they still have a really good running game, but I think that if they open this thing up, who knows? And I know I have a higher opinion of Geno Smith than others do. I also think if you look at his stats, his passing efficiencies, they're really solid, and of course he's won more games than he's lost the last 2 years by a good little margin. So I mean, he's a system quarterback, but I think this might be the system for him with Ryan Grubb, and then Arden Durday, the Dallas Cowboys defensive line coach under Dan Quinn, took the DC job. He'll be working hand in hand with McDonald and Frazier. Obviously, they're trying to. That was a good, smart hire because they had one of the worst run defense teams in the NFL last year. They and the Cardinals were like the two worst in the league. And so they obviously brought him in to coach up that interior, and of course they drafted Byron Murphy the second, which they're really excited about, and they've got some good players in there now. We'll see what happens, and then they cherry picked Jay Harbaugh, um, the special teams coach at Michigan under Jim Harbaugh, and but also with the Harbaugh ties to John Harbaugh, special teams coach turned head coach of Baltimore. That's a great hire, I think, for them too. I think he'll be fantastic in that role. So, your thoughts on the Seahawks?
Well, to the Jay Harbaugh point, which I think is hilarious because Jay followed his dad to the Chargers and then said, "You know what? I'm actually going to go to Seattle." Like weeks
Right,
later, once McDonald got the Seahawks job. Which, for those who don't know, Mike McDonald, before he became the defensive coordinator of the Ravens, was the defensive coordinator at Michigan. So
right,
McDonald and Jay Harbaugh were defensive coordinator, special teams coach
right,
on the 2021 Michigan team, which
right.
I think that team lost to Georgia. It was the first year that they had made the playoffs. Um, but that's funny that he was with his dad following him to the Chargers and then went to the Seahawks anyways. You mentioned Ryan Grubb, which I think is I was listening to Mina Kimes talk about him even before he got the Seahawks job, and it kind of made me feel like, you know what, this guy probably is due to get a shot as an NFL offensive coordinator because the NFL is just so devoid of quality offensive coordinators with innovative offenses in the modern age where, the last 2 years scoring has been at its lowest levels in the last 20-25 years because so much of it has become a time of possession game. And so I'm really curious to see what Ryan Grubb does going from what they were doing at Washington to what they're doing now in Seattle. And at least for 1 year, Geno Smith is the guy because one of the most surprising outcomes of the draft for me was that Seattle didn't take a stab at any quarterback, not even in round 4 or 5. They didn't take a single quarterback. Obviously, they traded for Sam Howell, and you could argue because he's only in his third year that's kind of like drafting a quarterback, but I was really surprised that they didn't bring in any option with a new head coach, new offensive coordinator, new coaching staff across the board, that they didn't, even if that person wasn't going to start over Geno Smith immediately, that they weren't going to bring in another quarterback. So they're committed to Geno Smith for the season. And I don't know enough about Grubb's portfolio to know what kind of a match of a quarterback to coordinator this is, but I'm really excited to see how it goes because I'm just excited Grubb gets to be an NFL offensive coordinator after everything they were doing at Washington last year.
Yeah, it's going to be, I think, one of the most fascinating questions of the NFC West this year is how well Grubb can assimilate his type of offense into the NFL, and he's got a great situation because he's got a defensive-minded head coach, and he'll be in full command of that side of the ball and free to do his thing. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to keep your eye on that. So then the question becomes, how comfortable are fans with the Cardinals doing, not making any additions, particularly in light of veteran coaches being hired as, like senior assistants around the league. The Boston Globe, Ben Valin, who I love, his Sunday column is a must read for me every week. Went through and highlighted all the senior coaches who have been added to staffs this year on the NFL, and the more the merrier for some of the teams. And people would argue that, oh well, for a younger coach, it's a risky thing to bring in a veteran coach who might sort of overshadow him. But I mean, Mike McDonald's obviously very comfortable in his own skin to bring in Leslie Frazier. Um, I think it's disappointing to me that with the youngest coaching staff in the NFL, the Cardinals didn't bring in some senior advisors um, on both sides of the ball, a quarterback guru, and someone with experience calling plays on defense and coordinating defenses. Marvin Lewis wound up going to the Raiders. He's from Arizona. He would have been a major coup, in my opinion. They could have made a handsome offer to him to stay home. I'm disappointed. And I know I've gotten serious pushback from fans on that, saying that no, they're fine. What sticks in my craw is, having studied the NFC offenses the way that I have over the years as a former coach, and how I would try to defend them. It's been a major question to me because I'm watching year after year the Cardinals getting their butts kicked by these offenses and not making a lot of progress or making a lot of adjustments. The best guy I've seen to do it, take on the McVay and Shanahan offenses, was Brian Flores, who knocked them off in his last year in Miami as head coach. He also knocked off the Cardinals and came up with an ingenious fourth quarter plan to slow Kyler Murray that other coaches like his former boss, Bill Belichick, jumped on later with success. What Flores did with his edges, like Van Winkle,
Van Ginkel, Andrew
Van
Van
Ginkel,
Ginkel.
excuse me, yeah, Van Winkle, was key in how you defend that. And I didn't see, any kind of disciplined edge play in all 4 games against the 49ers and Rams. I just couldn't believe I was watching an NFL defense trying to defend those NFL offenses. I mean, Sean McVay was on a morning football show the first time after he played, Rallis and Gannon's defense, laughing at how easy it was to get, to run their offense without such little resistance. Our fans are claiming lack of talent, lack of talent. It's not just lack of talent, because you can get any edge player to play it the way you're supposed to play it. There's a discipline from the edges you have to have because of all their motions, and you got to take away their cutback lanes. You got to take away their jet sweeps. They play you left to right to go north and south, and this is why it's so important to play your edges the right way. It's also so important to put the right personnel and do the right techniques versus their vaunted off tackle plays. Like, you can't get blown off the ball off tackle, and also you got to pinch that down and fill. So I can run through a litany of things that could have been done that I never saw in 4 games. And so, I see names like, Leslie Frazier here, and Brandon Staley, who reportedly is a good friend of Jonathan Gannon's. And I see that Marvin Lewis went to the Raiders. It just sticks in my craw. And I have to be honest and say that.
To your point about the edges too, guess where our friend Mr. Van Ginkel signed as a free agent this offseason?
Where
The
is that again?
I was saying,
Yeah, Minnesota.
Minnesota with Mr. Brian Flores.
Yeah, see, the Patriots this is where I get a lot of this too. It came from Flores, but it originally came from Belichick. If you want to watch outstanding football preparation and how you beat teams, watch the Patriots edges under Belichick. And it's carried over with Flores and others. They are very creative in how they play you. And they've also, what Flores did against Kyler was he flexed his edges and ran like a 4-4 defense and made it impossible for Kyler to escape. They're going to pen him in, and Kyler was beating him with having a great game, beating them with his legs, and suddenly he couldn't break contain, and suddenly he'd have to run inside, which he didn't want to do, and suddenly we're getting a bunch of 3-and-outs, and then Tua, in his first start, I think, as a pro, engineers a 99-yard game-winning touchdown. It was maddening. I mean, we had him on the ropes like third on the 2-yard line, on their 2-yard line, 3rd and 9. And I will never forget this. I wanted to throw everything I had at the TV. They're in soft zone, and a guy just crosses Pat P's face. I think it was Parker, for a 10-yard gain, and moves the chains out from under the goal line. It was the easiest pitch, any quarterback and any receiver could have made that throw. There was no resistance whatsoever from Peterson, and he just kind of played it cavalierly. But anyway, that's going back in time. We're going to move forward. But I'm frustrated with the Cardinals' lack of adding to the staff, and we'll see, see if it works. I mean, I'm going to stay open to that notion because, I've listened to my fellow members at our ROTB who said, no, they know what they're doing. They've got their chemistry. It's this and that. I just wish I saw more of it schematically and in players doing what they should have been taught to be doing, which didn't happen a lot. I saw a lot of players running around hard and trying to play hard. That I saw, but I didn't see the smart out aspect of it. And it was Gannon's recipe from the beginning. He said, play violent, aggressive, and smart. So I saw aggressive, but I didn't see a lot of smart. And also in the defensive coaching of personnel, and in how they coached up the secondary, which in my opinion did not make any noticeable progress throughout the season, except for Catrell Clark, who they just went and benched, and unwarranted, in my opinion, after the break game he played after getting benched the first time. So there's that portion. We're going to go to the NFC West and examine this position by position. Kyle, if you'll put up the next. All right, so here's what I like to do every year. I get the year before PFF grades, and then the starters, and then add where rookies are playing their college grade, and then we assess it. So we're going to go rapid fire here and ask ourselves, where are the Cardinals in terms of quarterbacks in the NFC West? So we'll start with quarterbacks. Kyler had a 70.8, Stafford 88.2, Purdy 87.4, Smith 82.9. What's your take?
So if I were to line up the quarterbacks in the division, I would probably go Purdy, Stafford, Kyler, and Geno, but I kind of think of Kyler and Geno in that same kind of tier where it's like, maybe quarterback purgatory isn't fair for Kyler, but at the very least with Geno Smith, every offseason since he took over for Russell Wilson, we've had the conversation of, will the Seahawks make a change at quarterback? Will they make a change at quarterback? And ultimately, they've always landed on Geno Smith as their guy, now through multiple coaching staffs. So I would probably go Purdy, Stafford, Kyler, and Geno if I had to put them in order.
Yeah, and if you're talking about pure talent, it's a different thing. I mean, Brock Purdy doesn't have near the talent that Kyler Murray does, but Brock Purdy plays the position in ways that Kyler doesn't, that helps make him be successful. like floating the pocket. He floats like a butterfly and stings like a bee. Because he can make those throws over the middle by when he floats to get open passing lanes and gets that added second to get his man open. Um, he's brilliant at that, and I think any quarterback in the NFL who can do that and win over the middle of the football field is going to win games for you. So, and Purdy had the best QBR in the NFL last year, and it was above 70, which is rare company. 71.2, I believe. There's a reason for that. So I would put him first. Stafford second, who's the most well-prepared quarterback, I think, in the NFL, particularly in terms not only of being keyed up and in sync with his receivers, but also in protections. He maps it out every week for the O-line. He's a master communicator of that and can call him out at the line when he needs to. And then I can't, with good conscience, put Kyler ahead of Geno Smith until he beats him and plays better than him. In all 3 games he's played against Geno, they've lost. Can't pin it all on Kyler, but I mean, this is the Seahawks here. 2 of the throws 3 games at home, we were favored to win. So I mean, and Smith too. He does some things that win ball games. I mean, he's pretty much a rock back there in the pocket, and he's got sneaky mobility, which has hurt the Cardinals in defending him. They've too often let him out of trouble, escape the pocket, and convert first downs. And now, if I'm going by pure talent, then it's a conversation that Kyler is as much as anyone in there probably has more pure passing, arm. Let me put it that way: arm and leg talent. I mean, he's got the best legs by far in the division. You have to factor that in there, and maybe with that you could kind of make a case for putting him ahead of Geno. But then again, Geno's legs aren't too shabby himself. So I agree with Kyle. It's a it's a toss up. But right, go ahead.
The other factor I add is, like, I know Kyler's had the major knee injury and he's no spring chicken, but Matthew Stafford also has dealt with an exorbitant number of injuries, and he's at the age where I don't expect the shoulder and neck injuries that he's been dealing with to get better as he goes along.
Right.
Maybe this season individually will be better than past seasons, but the injury history is stacking up with Matthew Stafford.
It is. And, they can't afford to lose him. And the 49ers can't afford to lose Brock Purdy. I mean, they signed Josh Dobbs to be the backup. And I don't know how Dobbs would look. He wasn't very good floating for the Cardinals either. In fact, I think that's probably one of his weaknesses. And maybe they coach him out of that, which I'm hoping the Cardinals are coaching Kyler Murray up to do, because it's a key in NFL today. At running back, you've got 4 studs in Connor, 89.2, Williams, 80.4, McCaffrey at 90.3, and Walker at 83.4. On a given day, one of these guys can, outrun the other. But I think you got to give the nod to McCaffrey, right, Kyle?
Well, he is the offensive player of the year and a future Hall of Famer. And I think I can only say definitively with 2 running backs in the NFL that they're future Hall of Famers. It's him and Derrick Henry. So I would give McCaffrey the nod.
Yeah, and he's the most versatile. So I would go McCaffrey, Connor, Walker, and Williams. That would be my 4. How about you?
I would go with the same order, although Kenneth Walker is just a physical specimen. Yes. Kenneth Walker, I joke that Pete Carroll, when he first got there, employed the Michigan State strategy of just tell Kenneth Walker to go do cool shit. And sometimes the play call can just be let Kenneth Walker do cool shit. And they did some of that his first year. He was battling injuries, and they kind of went to a more committee running system last year, but Kenneth Walker is just fantastic as a running back.
Well, the amazing thing is that the McCaffrey's held up physically since he joined the 49ers, whereas Connor Williams and Walker have had patches of injury, games lost due to injury. Hard to do is to go 17 games in the NFL these days. And what was surprising to me is they're still pounding the ball in the fourth quarter of McCaffrey in games they're ahead by 20, which I would have never done, try to save him. But
Yes.
weirdly, out of character, he fumbled that ball in the Super Bowl early in the game. I thought on the first drive, that was huge. And I'm
Mhm.
sure that's been sticking in his craw all off season.
Yeah.
But
The other part I'll say is, like, as much as I think Kenneth Walker is physically an incredible running back, he's not James Conner. I mean, James Conner is one of the most dependable running backs in terms of running the ball and running
right,
abilities. That's one of the most dependable running backs going back 6, 7 years, even at an age
right,
when running backs aren't supposed to be still doing what James Conner's doing.
right. So we're running back twos. I have Benson and Corum up there at the top. Well, Justin Kyle Juszczyk is a fullback and an All-Pro. He had an off season grade wise, but he's about as versatile. I mean, you add McCaffrey's versatility to his. Wow. And now I think the Cardinals are going to use Tip Raymond some in a juice check role, which is going to be fascinating. That was part of the allure of drafting him. So I think I'd put Jusek in his own category as the number one fullback in the division, or H back, whatever you want to call it. But I think Benson has a chance to be the best of these three, although Corum's nose for the end zone is just unbelievable. So I think it's probably a toss up between them. Charbonnet, I like as a change of pace back for Walker. Great tandem they are, and he could be poised in this new system to be very versatile.
Mhm. Absolutely, and I don't know if I'm changing the order that we brought up earlier in terms of the running back rooms in the division between San
Yeah,
Francisco, Arizona, Seattle, and Los Angeles.
yeah,
However, a lot of running game is a byproduct of offensive line play, and so I feel like once we bring in the offensive line into the conversation, maybe we can revisit the running backs a little bit as well.
right. Now, as we look at the three wide receivers, I'm going to say, that in terms of pure talent across the board, the San Francisco 49ers are loaded. I mean, picking up Pearsall and Cowan in this draft. Now, we don't know what's going on with Ayuk. He had a meeting with the team last week. Nothing was done there with his contract. It still could be that now if they drafted Pearsall and Cowan, and they got Jennings. Let's not forget him. Possession receiver is really good. Got size. I mean, they're loaded from top to bottom in that. You know, wow. I mean, so I would rate them one, and then it's a toss up for me between the Rams and the Seahawks. I would probably give the nod to the Rams, just because Cup and Nakua are outstanding compliments. They can both are modern day receivers who can win outside, inside, no matter where, from out of the backfield. So, and right now you'd have to rate the Cardinals fourth, but that's a thing to watch during this season, because you got three guys here who could really emerge this season in the passing game. In Harrison Jr., obviously, in Michael Wilson and Greg Dortch. Um, Dortch could be special in this offense. I think that Kyler knows it now. He knows it now. Wilson too, as a verse. I think they're going to use Wilson at times in the slot this year as a big slot. Harrison too, although Harrison wins mostly on the perimeter. It's a fascinating young group, and going with a stud young tight end is really exciting. I think that McBride is pushing Kittle for best tight end in the league, or in the division, excuse me. You got to keep the keep the nod with Kittle so far, but McBride is, as I say, knocking the door. Higby and Font are solid, but not great receiving threats, or at least haven't been to this point. Now let's get to the offensive line, and let's see who I want to know who Kyle thinks is the strongest here. What's fascinating to me is on PFF, they had the Cardinals rated number one running attack in the NFL, grade wise, and the Cardinals offensive line like 30th. I mean, I don't know how in the world, and the I don't know how in the world that happens. And conversely, with the 49ers, they had Niners ranked second in the NFL in running attack, and their offensive line ranked one. I mean, what? I mean, I don't think the 49ers offensive line, personally, besides from Trent Williams, and don't get me wrong, he is he's a he walked into the league in a yellow jacket, a golden jacket. I mean, he is just unbelievable. But the others, I mean, look at their grades. Nothing to really write home about. Cardinals graded better individually. And what's fascinating to me is that, with the let me look at this. ESPN's preseason top 30 players by position. At tackle, it was Williams and Havenstein were the two ranked. Williams at 1, Havenstein for the Rams at 22. And he's a good right tackle. He's getting older. He's in his 30s. So no other tackles mentioned. Number 1 guard was Dotson, who the Rams just signed to the big contract. At 12, Will Hernandez was the second to make their top 30 at 23, and they had Jonah Jackson at 30. So the 2 Rams guards they just signed are in there with Hernandez, and it was great to see Will Hernandez get that kind of recognition. Then they had Froholt as the highest rated center in our division because he came in at 19th. Brendel of the Niners came in at 21st. Avila, the rookie last year for the Rams, came in at 22nd. And Olawatimi for the Seahawks came in at 30. So, there's 2 positions that, are pretty, are where we have Cardinals suddenly right up near the top in the division, which is pretty exciting. So, I think with the addition of Jonah Williams and kicking Paris Johnson where he belongs over to left tackle, I think the Cardinals have a very good shot at being the best offensive line in this division. If you look at the numbers, it sort of bears it out. I mean, the Rams, because they signed the 2 guards, are getting a lot of press. And Avila looks like a good young player, so they might be really good up the middle. But I don't know about the tackles, Alaric Jackson and Havenstein being older. I don't know about that. The 49ers, to me, look like system players who, get it done as a group, but individually not so much. And then the Seahawks are young. Cross is a young tackle. Lucas is a young tackle. They added Tomlinson, who's good, but coming off a poor year. And then they added the guard Christian Haynes, which so many of our fans were wanting in the draft. So they're addressing it, and they might be better this year. We'll see how Ryan Grubb employs them. But so, Kyle, what's your thought on that?
So, going back to the conversation we had about running backs, even though the Rams have the 4th ranked running back room, I think they have the best offensive line units going into 2024. And the original McVay offense that people were enamored by was a lot of the zone running games. He inherited Todd Gurley, and we saw Gurley have the best years of his career before the injuries with McVay. But people don't notice that McVay completely switched up the way that he ran offenses based on the personnel that he had during that second Super Bowl run, right? They were
Right.
struggling to establish a running game, so it became use the pass as a run. We
Right.
engage Cooper Kupp. We bring in Odell Beckham, and Odell Beckham becomes a possession guy. And they completely changed up the way that they ran their offense. And I don't think Sean McVay gets enough credit for being willing to reinvent himself a number of times over. And now
Right.
it feels like they're going back to more of the zone running style of offense that McVay was working on the first time of his career. And I think they're going to have success with that because Kyron Williams has been a very good to not great running back, but with him and now adding Blake Corum and signing 2 guards, I think they're planning to go back to some of that zone running scheme. And with the committee of Williams and Corum, I think they're going to have some success running the ball in ways that they haven't the last 3 years per se. So I
Yeah.
love what the Rams are doing on that offensive line. Everything you said about Seattle is correct. It's just new coaching staff, new offensive line coach, 3 players who are in their first, second, or third years in the league. It's very hard to project out what that's going to look like.
Right.
We'll see what
Yeah.
happens with them. And then San Francisco, you kind of hit the nail on the head in the sense that San Francisco's numbers are always going to be predominantly higher in the offensive line game because they have the singular greatest offensive lineman I've ever seen in my entire life. And granted, I only have a reference point to the early aughts,
Right.
but Trent Williams is the greatest offensive lineman I've ever seen. And, maybe you can go back to your Munoz's of the 80s or whatever, but I would look at Trent Williams and say that might be the greatest offensive lineman to ever play professional football. And even in his 30s is still the number 1 PFF graded offensive lineman as a shoo-in every single
Right.
season. And so that having that anchor on the left side of your defense is going to transform everything that you do. Case in point, when Trent Williams missed 3 games last year, they went on a 3-game losing streak. He came back and they started another 6-game winning streak after he returned from injury. Like everything they
Well,
do
yeah.
is he might be the
Yeah.
most valuable player on the San Francisco 49ers, and that's incredible
Yeah.
to say. But the rest of that defense is, 1, nothing to really write home about, and 2 is basically the exact same unit as last year. That was always one
Right.
injury away from falling apart. So San Francisco is going to be better by proxy of having Trent Williams as the anchor of everything they do. Also, they have, if we go up a little bit on that list, they have the best blocking tight end in the NFL for my money in George Kittle.
Right.
And so that makes up for some of those offensive line shortcomings, is
Right.
that you can put Kittle opposite of Trent Williams and have a relatively effective run blocking game. So as it relates to the Cardinals, I look at that and say they have a solid unit across all 5 position groups, and I'm curious which one player is going to make that step up and become an impact player, because that's how you usually get into the top 5 of offensive line units in the NFL is a singular impact player and stability across the rest of your offensive line. And the Cardinals have filled out all 5 positions with players who are, for the most part, ranked on your PFF list of, you said the top 30 at each position between
Yeah.
tackles and guards. Now, I know we have Brown slotted in there as the left guard. There's a chance that the rookie, whose name I am drawing a blank
Isaiah
on.
Adams.
Yes, thank you. There's a chance that that's Isaiah Adams who's starting at
Yes.
left guard
Yep.
come the start of the season. But regardless of what they go with, I think you could say they have options and stability at the left guard position. So
Right.
my hope is that Paris Johnson, now that he's going to be slotted in as a true left tackle, can see a big step up in year 2 and be a
Right.
Pro Bowl caliber left tackle. But in the meantime, I think it's a positive sign that you can look at all 5 positions and say they have stability and depth at every offensive line position, because even if I don't think right now the Cardinals unit is better than the Rams, I think that this is the best Cardinals offensive line unit we've seen in at least the 4 years that we've been doing this podcast. So I think
Right.
of at least the last 4 years, this is the best unit the Cardinals have brought to the table on the offensive line, even if I still think the Rams starting 5 is stronger right now.
Yep. Um, I think they got a really good shot. You made a great point about tight ends because the the Niners and the Cardinals do a great job in their 12 and 13 personnel, which really helps contribute to the big running games that they have. So that's a key thing. And with the Cardinals adding Tip Raymond, who may be an absolute stud blocker, he's got the makeup for that big time. I mean, this could be even better. And when you put a tight end over to a tackle side, it helps the tackle enormously. As a huge bonus. Like you can hide an average tackle, but I think Jonah Williams has a chance to be really good. And I think he signed a 2-year deal, but I think he's looking for long term security. He's going to play really hard, and like you said, with Paris making a jump perhaps. But I think Will Hernandez can challenge Dotson for best guard in the division. I really believe that, and I think that Froholt can be um, the best center, in the division as well. Question will be that left guard spot. So, but it makes for good discussion, and I like the way you single out the Rams because I do think they're coming on strong with those signings, without a doubt. So we'll see. But with the defense, we're going to take a more broader view than specific. But what was fascinating to me was, how fewer players were highlighted in top 30s by ESPN in the NFC West. Check this out. In terms of edge, there's only one, Bosa. Top 30 in the league. No one else from the NFC West. Interesting. Defensive line, Hargrave at 7. Kobe Turner came in at 16, which for a young player. I mean, look at his PFF grade. Now, whether that'll change now that he isn't playing next to Aaron Donald, will maybe a different story. And playing it next to a rookie instead, who I like the young rookie Brandon Frisk from FSU. But I think as a rookie, he's going to have a learning period. But Hargrave's in there, Turner, Leonard Williams, understandably from the Seahawks, and they have Byron Murphy Jr. sneaking in there as a rookie. Just as, by the way, they had, like we said earlier, they had Marvin Harrison sneaking in as a rookie at 21 and wide receivers in the NFL. That's pretty cool. So, and then linebacker is heavy for the other teams. Warner is 1 in the league, according to them. And then he's paired now with Devondre Campbell. Remember him? He's been signed, coming off maybe a little bit of a down year in Green Bay. The kids Dodson and Baker, this surprised me. Were relatively unknown kind of guys that kind of popped up and played pretty well last year. They have them, and Dodson and Baker are with the Seattle Seahawks. And look at their grades, but those are kind of skewed grades. They weren't full-time players all season long. As 21st and 24th, and then they have Ernest Jones, which shocks me, at 30. I would have thought he'd be way ahead of Baker and Dodson. Way ahead. He's been playing fantastic football. both versus the run and he's outstanding in coverage. He's burned us a few times with end zone interceptions, or at least that one time that really the pass that was meant for Zach Ertz, he picked at a really tough time when the Cardinals were knocking on the door to get this thing close against them. I think 2 years ago. But anyway, then so that takes care of the linebackers thing. I think what that says is that they're having trouble finding 30 great linebackers in this league. And where the Cardinals guys stand, and Kaiser White, of course, White graded pretty well, or actually his PFF grade was 58. I don't know, that's a typo. It was 58.6. He was just up and down like the sine curve. One really good game, then one bad game, one good game. Counted him out in 11 games. He had 5 very good games and 6 below par games. He's got the want to Kaiser, and he's a physical player. I'm just not sure if he has the stature to hold up as a Mike. I think he's more of a will, excuse me. But the Cardinals have other options. They can kick White over to Will and put in Chris Barnes, who was in the 60s for the 65 last year for the Cardinals, had some really good games. He's a thumper, and he's got range. Of course, then you picked up Mac Wilson. Well, I think it's going to be versatile. I think he'll play all around, maybe even every linebacker position in the 34. And then, excuse me. So, and then on the edges, I was writing today that in the article that I wrote on Revenge of the Birds about assessing the Cardinals position groups on versus Mike Clay's of ESPN's rankings. And I said on the edges where I think he has the Cardinals ranked in like 26 or something. I said it all depends on Collins and BJ Ojulari. If they improve this year, significantly improve, then that unit could be pretty dang good, because I think if they give Gardeck more snaps than what they did last year, they only gave him 300 something to rush the passer. I think if they give him 500, he's going to have 10 plus sacks with his quickness off the edge. And then maybe you get something out of Xavier Thomas, the rookie from Clemson, who so far looks good in practice. So I think this could be a much improved edge, but it certainly depends on Collins emerging as a pass rusher and on Ojulari picking up his game, which so far in camp he's looked the part and is turning heads. So that's fortuitous for us. But and then in the secondary at cornerback, they had Ward at number 1 in the league. Charvarius Ward. Oh, he's good. I don't know if he's number 1, but and they had Witherspoon and Woolen, the two Seahawks, as 21 and 25. That's it. No other cornerbacks. And at safeties, they had Hufanga at 13. I disagree with that. He's a good player, but he's not better than Budda Baker. They had Baker at 14, Cameron Curl at 21, Jalen Thompson at 26. I disagree with that too. I think Thompson's better than Curl. And then Love, Justin Love from the Seahawks. So, and that's it. That was all the defensive players. So you go down. What that suggests to me is that how close these defenses are, except when you get past San Francisco. I mean, San Francisco is still loaded.
Walter, I know you have the information in front of you, but following along, it sounds like the only team that has a top 10 at any position was the San Francisco 49ers.
Right.
There were no top, I mean, there were no top 10s at any position for the Rams, Seahawks, or Cardinals. Is that correct?
Correct. Right.
Wow.
Yep. So, except, oh, I forgot to write down tight end. Oh, we'll have to go find that. I think that um, if we can
Yeah,
you go take a peek ESPN's 2024 preseason top 30 players by position.
yeah, I can look for that. But I was saying more on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, yeah. I just noticed that when I was looking down my list. I was the only one I thought might make it is McBride, because McBride's the only top 100 player this year for the Cardinals as voted on. He came in at 80 something, I think, um, or maybe 70 something. But we have no other 100 rated players this year, coming off a tough year last year. So, and Boo didn't have one of his better years, so otherwise he would have been in there. But yeah, your point is really well taken. Is a lot of it is the heavy stardom is in that San Francisco unit, and the rest, all three of the other defenses are pretty much on a par, in my opinion, in certain ways. Um, Seahawks. If those two young linebackers are good, like ESPN thinks they're going to be, that Seahawks defense is going to be pretty dang good.
Well, I think you could say that the Seahawks and Cardinals are in similar positions, right? Defensively, like maybe the Cardinals fell off a bit harder the last few years because they've been 32nd ranked defenses according to Pro Football Focus at times, but
Right.
Seattle is just doing a rough eyeballing here. Seattle is 8 players who are either their first, second, or third year in the league. They have a first-time defensive play caller coming over from the Dallas Cowboys, and that
Baltimore. Oh, yeah. Well,
yeah, I
McDonald's going to
guess
call the
I
plays.
guess that's true. McDonald could end up being the play caller for the
Yeah.
defense instead of
Yeah.
the guy from the Cowboys whose name is slipping me right now, but the they have new first time defensive coordinator, 8 players who are in their first, second, or third years. They've kind of had to reinvent this defense a little bit. And I think the Cardinals are in a similar type of position where they have the Gardex, they have the Kaiser Whites and the Sean Murphy Buntings, but a lot of it is first, second, and third year players.
Right. Yep. I mean, look at the secondaries: Murphy Bunting, Garrett Williams, Buda Baker, Jalen Thompson. And then you got for the Rams, Darius Williams, who had a great year. I mean, and that's a huge pickup for them too, because they've been playing 6th rounders. They also picked up Tre'Davious White, so those were 2 big pickups for them, plus the 2 guards. And then Lake and Curl are solid in the secondary. You get Javarius Ward, Lenoir, Hufanga, and Brown is just really solid second. Look at all their grades in the 70s. Of course, that helps when you have a great pass rush too. But then Woolen, Weatherspoon, Love, and Jenkins, if he has a good year, could challenge them at the top. And where the Cardinals are a little behind the Seahawks is in the secondary, but they have young players who can make a huge difference. I'll be
Again,
interested to see
it's
who
it's stepping
emerges.
it's building blocks for the Cardinals because they literally have had the worst secondary or the worst cornerback room in the NFL for each of the last 2 seasons. So it's stepping
Yeah,
stools. If you
yeah,
include Max Melton and Keitrell Clark into that group, they will not be last in the NFL this year. I don't know how good they'll be, but they will not be dead last in the NFL this year.
yeah. And the versatility they added at safety too. They needed someone on the deep end for help. This Dadrion Taylor Demerson is a huge pickup. Plus, I love Andre Chachere played well in a supporting cast role last year, and then Joey Blunt, who I think is a physical specimen, who the ball hawk. who could play on the back end too. I think that gives us more talent and options, particularly too playing the slot because the Rabbit can play the slot really well, and we've got um, Garrett Williams who can play the slot. You got Melton who can play the slot. You've got Katro Clark who can play the slot. I think even Elijah Jones can play the slot at times against a bigger wide receiver. So the options there are so much more plentiful and talented. So it's encouraging. And so I think the summary for me would be, and then the kickers and punters are, pretty similar. I like our tandem of Prater and Gillikin, and probably as well as any of the ones in the league. Although Myers and Dick Dixon's a monster leg. I mean, that's a potentially really all-star tandem too. Myers was off to a great start last year, then tailed off, but um, special teams probably for kickers is about there's parity there. And I think the teams themselves, the Cardinals, are better than all the others. We'll see. I'm sure that young Harbaugh is going to want to make his mark in Seattle. So, but anyway, as a summary, I would just say that I think that the Cardinals' offense has a clear, could be right up there, behind the 49ers in this division this year, depending on if they can build off what they did last year and get more efficient in the passing game. And the defense, there's an opening here. I mean, I don't think this division is stocked full of star players anymore. I mean, you lost Bobby Wagner from the division, you lost Aaron Donald from the division, some guys who have haunted the Cardinals for years. And there's a surplus of younger players, and I like what the Cardinals are doing young talent wise through the draft. Wish they had done more, particularly at edge, but and at defensive tackle. And then I'm curious to see if the playing Kaiser White inside linebacker, who they decide to go with in tandem, whether it's Mac Wilson, whether it's Owen Popo, who played really well at the end of last year, was one of the fastest linebackers on the planet. And then you've got Chris Barnes, who I like a lot. He's a thumper, and he moves and he can finish. So that's going to be huge. I think with Jones and Nichols on the interior, occupying some blockers the way that we needed last year, it's going to be a huge help. And then Darius Robinson, I think, could be an absolute stud at 34 D end. It could be the next Campbell, Calais Campbell for us. And if that's the case, that bodes well for the future. So I think we're closer talent wise than certainly we were last year. And that's when you look at these numbers and you look at, you compare to what the other teams have. I think it gives them a chance, better chance to win games in this division. Of course, we went 0-6 and got thumped. Got outscored by almost 100 points. It was ugly. And hopefully that can begin to change for good this season. So, one last thing I wanted to get to is we've got questions from some of the members at ROTV. And Kyle, you feel free to answer these as well. What is your definition? What would be your definition? This is from ZP714. What would be your successful season this year in regards to wins and losses? Kyle, what would you think?
That is a good question. While I think about that, let me pull up the Cardinals' schedule real quick so that I can kind of get a quick gauge. of where things stand right now. Like, if the Cardinals win 7 games this year, I won't view it as an outright failure, right? And no one wants to hear 7-10 because 7-10 could theoretically put you in the top 10. I mean, the Falcons finished 7-10, I think 3 years in a row and ended up with a top 10 pick every single year. But just if they can get at least if they can get a win against the Rams, a win against the Seahawks, and beat teams who are in the playoffs, they should be able to get to 8 or 9 wins, right? Like if they go theoretically 2-4 in the division, they have games on the schedule against the Panthers, the Patriots, the Vikings, teams that they theoretically should be able to beat. The Commanders with a rookie quarterback in week 4. There's games on the schedule that in past years, other teams might look at as easy victories that the Cardinals come into this year and say, we could win 3 of those 4 games. Or, not the Cardinals team itself, but I look at and say they could win 3 out of those 4 games. They get a couple wins against the Rams and Seahawks and then play competitively. It's the NFL. Like, weird results happen all the time. The Cardinals went into Pittsburgh with the Steelers on a win streak and just throttled them this season. So like weird results happen all the time. So I look at this and say if they get to 7-8 wins, it won't be an outright disappointment, but more so I'm just curious to see how they get there, right? If they go 7-10 but go 4-2 in the division, you might look at that differently compared to
Right.
7-10 but 1-5 in the division
Right.
theoretically.
Yeah, I think that was really well said. And my initial impulse, ZP, is that I'm more concerned about preparation and seeing the Cardinals attempting to do the right things fundamentally and like execute a game plan. So if I see that, and regardless of whether they win or lose, that's encouraging to me. That tells me they're being properly coached. I didn't get that overwhelming sense last year for the Cardinals in the passing game on offense, and I didn't get it at all in any phase on defense. So um, I'm that's what I'm looking at this year. If I see myself personally, if I see them doing the right things and orchestrating this the right way, and like I said, using their edges properly against a McVay or Shanahan defense, even if they like miss a tackle here and there, but I know they're instructed to do the right thing, then I'll feel more confident heading forward. But I'm with Kyle. I think if you had to put a number on it, hey, Cliff won 4 games in a tie his first year. His second year, he went 8-8. So I think if the Cardinals get to 8 wins this year, you can say, well, this is trending the way Cliff had it after 2 years. I think that would be a really positive sign. So, you know, and I think that the division games should be more competitive, hopefully, if they can game plan properly. And that's why I was worried about them not bringing in some advisors to help. I mean, it always helps. BA had Tom Moore in his ear. Tom Moore is a guru. I mean, you know, Tom Moore wasn't going to be threatening to BA. But you have a sometimes you can really, really take advantage of guys who've been around the block. And let me put it this way. Oftentimes when you're an advisor, you see things you wouldn't have seen otherwise because you can stand separately. So, we'll see. They're doubling down on the youngest coaching staff in the NFL. But I think this is a year they got to prove that they got what it takes to hold up, particularly in our division.
If you're looking for a metric to analyze it with, too, to the people who are wondering, if we can get a single unit top 8 in the NFL in Pro Football Focus grades, I think that's a sign that the young coaching staff is bringing in young players, developing them, and have some promise for the future, right? If
Right.
I don't even care what unit it is, just a single unit that grades top 8 in the league in Pro Football Focus grades,
Right.
um, or if you want to look at things like the net ranking that we had there, or DVOA is a statistic that I like that kind of
Right.
takes game situation into account. If you can get a unit that finishes
Right.
top 8 in the league, I think that's sign that that preparation and development is actually happening with the young people.
Yeah. See, here's the other thing, and I'm glad you mentioned that because you also want to see players, and particularly the young players, coached well, not mind games and head cases and, taking them off the field. I didn't like these wholesale substitutions on defense. Defense is so predicated on continuity and the chemistry you have, the way you need to talk to each other, that when you're throwing in hockey lines, it just is chaos. You've got to settle down on a defense you really like and let them play. That's for one for me. But for two is guys got to improve as the season went on. I saw Catrell Clark improve um, after his benching, came up with one of the best cornerback games we had all season. He scored in the PFF grade in the 70s. He led the team in tackles, tied with Buddha in that game. And it was a comeback game against the Rams where he had gotten burned the first time around by Cooper Kupp on two just laser dimes that were thrown against him by Matt Stafford. And then he also, in that game, gave up two catches on four targets for 5 yards. I mean, he played the whole game. I mean, he was outstanding. And then they bench him again. I, I for guys that really, I mean, I like Starling Thomas the fifth, but I can't definitively say that he got better as the season went on. I mean, look at the home run pass he gave up with the game on the line against the Seahawks against Lockett. That was a bad look for a guy who played that much in the second half of the season at a really bad time. And I expect him to bounce back from that, and maybe he'll be one of the guys to improve. Here's what we saw on offense: we saw marked improvement from players. We saw it from Kyler, who finished the year with 2 good games. We saw it from that offensive line. We saw it even Elijah Wilkinson when he came back in, played a good left guard, very aggressive. We saw Paris Johnson improve. That was huge down the stretch. He was not very good all year, and then the last 4 games were his best 4. That's what you want to see. You want to, particularly with your young players, you want to see progress. And we saw Michael Wilson and Greg Dortch emerge in the last 2 games. Huge, right? And that sets the table for this season. So, but on defense, can you name any players you thought, oh, wow, this guy's really improving? The one that I saw was Owen Popo, but he only got, a short run, in terms of snaps. I don't know if Kyle saw anyone he thought, wow, that kid's really improving.
I
Um,
I'm not necessarily improvement, but I just like the limited play Ojulari got once he got back from injury. But
yeah,
that's not necessarily market improvement because he was injured at the start of the
right.
year.
The problem with that was he couldn't sustain it. And, maybe because that leg was bothering him, I don't know. But no pressures or sacks in the last 6 games was tough. And so he hit the proverbial, rookie wall.
And he
But he
only
wasn't.
played at like 20 something percentage of the snaps when he was on the field.
That's the other thing is, you got to give guys a chance to get some momentum going when he's on the field too. So, all right, there's 2 more questions, or actually 3. So it's this is from since 61, my good buddy. What will it take to change your opinions on the head coach in DC? Will the offense continue to be run first, or is KM gonna sling it with a much improved wide receiver squad?
Well,
Well,
so
like I said, go ahead. You can answer that.
for the first question, I don't necessarily feel one way or the other about Gannon and Rallis. I think that's probably better tuned to you. I think if these are the people you're going with, fine, put them in a position to succeed. I know Gannon seemed unserious at times last year, and that's the biggest criticism I could give him because according to the NFLPA report card, players liked him. There weren't players, leaking to the media, oh, this guy's a nutcase or things like that. It wasn't anything like that. It's just he had some unserious moments. And in terms of the running game, I think it goes back to what the conversation we had earlier. What is the offensive line unit you're going to put together? And if that's going to be the case, what does Petzing kind of put together with the group that he has? Because I think that's just putting your faith in Drew Petzing. And if there's anyone on the young coaching staff that has shown evidence that there's going to be some market improvement and innovation, it's with Drew Petzing. So I would put, regardless of whether it does become a run offense or Kyler proverbially slinging it, I think it's going to be. I trust that Drew Petzing is going to put something together that is successful because he's
Right.
shown signs that he's been a very strong play caller and willing to adapt to the personnel packages that he does have. And you've given him Marvin Harrison Jr., so bonus points for that. Another
Right.
incredible weapon to work with.
Well, and Kyler's calling Petzing a genius. So, and he's saying we're going to be tops in the league, and we're going to be contending. Well, his goal is to contend for this year's Super Bowl. So they're talking lofty goals, and which makes me nervous from anyone. In Patriots land, you don't do that. You don't jinx it, and that's my worry about the Cardinals since it's won. Um, I'm a big guy on karma and football gods and things. I think there are reasons why a Mahomes wins multiple Super Bowls and Brady did. How they curry favor with the football guards because of the sacrifices they make. And I don't know how the football gods would feel about Monty Ossenfort, to tell you the truth, breaking the rules, NFL rules. That whole thing was a debacle and a PR nightmare to me. And the fans want to just say, screw off Philadelphia. I don't, because when you burn bridges like that or you do stuff like that around the league, it's so bogus and it creates bad karma. I mean, if you're a football god up there, you going, wow, that Monty Ossenfort did the right thing. You're not. You're just going like, man, that was cheap. What a stupid decision, because you could just wait 2 weeks and you got him. You can talk to him all you want, you know, and coming in the league with Gannon under those circumstances and lying about it, all of that is like just the karma of that has residual, consequences. And then these videos, I'm sorry, I love to watch them. I'll confess, but it's like watching something is wrong, but entertaining. I won't get into specifics like that, but it's wrong from the standpoint of the first video of the tape of the how the trade went down with the Texans because of the hubris of it and the way that you're not supposed to you know publicize these. These are should be privileged phone calls, and if they're not, they should be. And I think throughout most NFL GMs would tell you you don't do that. As much as you're starved to try to make an impression on a fan base that might have been really pissed off that you just squandered a third round draft pick for hiring Gannon. And this is my thing with Gannon. How high are the football gods on Gannon after that? Plus, the question I have about him is he more bluster and hype than he is actual coach? And one of the things that concerns me is people said, oh, well, players were playing like crazy for him. Players were playing like crazy for their jobs last year. I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, they came in, he said, I want killers. They're getting rid of guys left and right. They seem to have a thing against Steve Kahn draft picks. They're culling out, they're weeding out the roster. It was a survival mode in that building. So of course you're gonna play as hard as you can, because not only do you want to make the impression here on win the win over the coaches, you want to win it around the league. And if you get cut by the Cardinals in that scenario, how does it make you look around the NFL? I mean, at that point, looks like the Cardinals had the worst roster or one of the worst rosters in the league. So if you get cut from it, what does that mean? But they were cutting some really decent talent, and not giving it, in my opinion, enough time. But that's where, now on the flip side, Monty, I thought, did a really good job in this year's draft. I think the major stamp of it was Dave Sears, to tell you the truth. And I think Monty, in confidence, would tell us that too. I think Dave Sears has made a profound difference in how we draft. And those picks were, even though I preferred other guys at certain spots, I could see the wisdom in each pick that they made and see the value in it. So kudos to all that. So he continues to do that. That's going to be a wonderful thing. He just got to bring back a state of integrity to the Cardinals that hasn't been there for years. I mean, you can't say Cardinals and integrity in the same vein. And that's my concern is we'll never win with the football gods if that doesn't change. So, and can it change under Monty? It's shocking to me he's not more, he's not applying what he probably could have learned under Belichick more on certain ways of handling situations. And that should come in time because I think Monty is a passionate guy who really wants to do well. He's got the want to big time. And he's got a fiery personality and love the hugs and all that. So, but the biggest decision he's made thus far, the two biggest, are still on the line in my book. One is the hiring of Gannon and the youngest staff of the league. Whether that was last, I still can't get, if you're going to hire the youngest coach like they did in Houston, don't you want him to win out the gate or give him every chance to win out the gate? I mean, and you have the youngest coaching staff and you win only 4 games. What does that say? I mean, he's sort of behind the 8 ball already, but does he have the coaching behind him, the mastery of coaching, the X's and O's, the game planning, all that? That's what's interesting. If he does, we're great because he's got a great way of hyping up players and stuff. And the second thing is the decision about Kyler, because they came in and decided. It was an interesting thing. When Monty arrived, I wasn't sure what he was thinking of Kyler. In fact, he was sort of, kind of pushing back on some of the reporters who were asking about, well, what kind of coach will you get for Kyler? And his answer was, I want to coach for every player. I thought that was brilliant. That was awesome. But I think Gannon came in to this for his interview, and he said, I want to come in under these conditions. I want to come in under, and if not, I don't want the job. I don't want to coach, be an off defensive coordinator ever again. I want to be a real head coach who branches out to everybody, so I can run this thing, oversee it from the top, the way that Nick Sirianno has been doing, with my encouragement in Philadelphia. So check, they did that. He said, and the other is, we're going to take this Kyler Murray thing and flip it around. We're just going to make it the most positive thing possible, because either one way or the other, it helps us. If he responds and plays well, it helps us. Or if he responds and well enough, we can still trade him or get some value for him. But we're not going to let this thing linger much longer. We're just going to come in and play it and believe in it. And here's where, again, with the football gods, it gets dicey. Because here's a guy that quit in a certain way on the Eagles during Super Bowl weeks. He quit giving him his undivided attention. And there's a quarterback who quit on his own team against LA. And people want to downplay that. Go ahead. But the way the football gods work and the way karma works, it doesn't work like that. Now, Kyler's been digging himself out as much as he can. And credit to him. He's restored his, he's improved his image. He's improved as a leader and in bonding with his players. I mean, he's come a long way since that time of trying to rebuild some trust in that locker room and with his teammates. Kudos, that's going all in the right direction. He was also incentivized to the tune of 10.2 million in his contract to be in the building, which is, the football guys would look at that and go, you know, is that what franchise quarterbacks need to be paid? You need to pay a franchise quarterback. So, I mean, all this goes back to, you know, when can Kyler overcome some of the bad karma he's created for himself? And when does that happen? Now, I think after last year and the way he came back and played, it garnered favor. I think there are things that are moving in that direction. But this is why I got so upset when he threw Kingsbury under the bus in an interview recently. Is that like bad karma of that? Because it was, I mean, who did more to bring that football team down, Kyler or Cliff? You're talking about the least hardworking player in the building versus the hardest person in the building. I mean, and I'll ask everyone this, and I'd love to hear your answer to it. Who do you think curries more favor with the football gods? Kyler Murray or Cliff Kingsbury? I mean, if the football gods are going to play favorite to one of them, who would it be? Kyle, what would you say?
That's a good question because the football gods did banish Cliff Kingsbury to Washington, but also, uh, I don't know exactly which direction I would go with that because I think it was just the relationship itself wasn't there, and ultimately the Cardinals maybe coulda, shoulda, woulda chose Kingsbury over Kyler or Kyler versus Kingsbury, but ultimately they, for better or for worse, sided with the franchise quarterback, whether he was in the right or the wrong. So I don't know if I think the football gods are setting both of them up to be in incredible positions to succeed in the future. It just was something that didn't work out between the two of them together.
Well, you know, how would the football gods feel about Kyler scrubbing his socials?
I don't know.
Oh, come on,
How do you think they would
come on.
feel?
I mean, it's one of the most cowardly things you can do. And it
Hmm.
says to your team, I'm quitting on you, like I did in that game.
Or just, in hindsight, I think we have that evidence, but I think they didn't do enough to kind of quell that at the very beginning when they did the whole scrubbing the socials thing. I think it's silly, but it's not something that should be emotionally affecting the people who you work with as long as you're having transparent conversation with them behind the scenes, which I think is where some of the immaturity stuff came into play. But I don't know if that's necessarily currying favor or wrath with the football gods in this scenario. I think there was a immaturity behind a lot of that, but especially because he didn't need to. The Cardinals were ultimately going to
Well,
give him the contract extension he was looking for.
how would the good football gods feel about a player who played his worst football game in the playoff game, refused to go back in the game, 2 weeks later during Super Bowl weeks? Well, these Super Bowl weeks are crushing the Cardinals lately. He scrubs his socials of all things Cardinals and puts a photo of he and CeeDee Lamb on there, who he just played with in the Pro Bowl.
Yeah, I
If you're a
hear. Yeah.
football god, you can't. You're risking tearing everything you've done so far with the Cardinals down. You're also here's a guy who's supposed to be your franchise quarterback, and you have a Super Bowl coming to your building when the last two Super Bowl winners won in their own buildings. Is now the time to make it all about me? Or is now the time to say, Cardinals, fuck off? I mean, when you destroy the whole, plus he saw what happened with Pat P when he did it. He saw what happened with Chandler Jones when he did it. There's not a good outcome to this. And it says to the team, I want out. I'm not buying your Cardinals thing. Now, someone could answer, well, that's understandable because Cardinals have always sucked and this and that. I'm going to beg to differ. In that run, we had J.J. Watt in the building. We had DeAndre Hopkins if he had gotten his, head on straight. We had some star power in that building that could have gone a long way. We went 7-0 for a reason. But if you're a football god and you're looking at that and you're saying, like, this guy doesn't want to be in Arizona anymore after 3 years, he's just canning on him. He's tanking on him. And what did it take? And then he's rewarded with a $230 million contract, which I said at the time would be the worst decision Michael Bidwell could ever make. Because what kind of a statement does that make to the locker room? It's a guy who is trashing you on social media. His agent's calling you out. I mean,
but the message it sent is that it's his team, and it is, and rewarding immature behavior is one thing, but ultimately if you look at it from a macro point of view, the players who were on that team are no longer on the team anymore. Like Kyler is one of the longest tenured Cardinals at this point. They've shifted out all the players from the 21-22 seasons, and they have 75% of roster turnover within 2 years.
And think of why they had to do that.
Oh,
they
yeah.
had to get younger players who didn't see Kyler quit on them. That's
in
what
part,
they had to do.
Ultimately, it was also a cynical cost-cutting measure at the same time, and that's also one of the results, right? Is that you bring it now. Kyler Murray's one of the longest tenured players on the team with a bunch of young, hungry players that the Cardinals have, if I remember correctly, from the time that they were 11-1 in 2021 until now, they've gone, I think, like 11-32-1 or something like that. So,
Right.
It is a new team with new players that has lost a lot of games over those 2.5 years. But ultimately, the message it sent is that it's ship up or shape out kind of stuff. And maybe a lot of that was out of people's control anyways, because a lot of those players were traded, released, signed with other teams on their own volition. But 75% of the roster got turned over within 2 years.
Because it had to be. And there's still guys in that building that still wonder, the few remaining ones who were there in that moment. I mean, a lot of people, if you haven't played football before and know how a team works, that's one of the unbreakable rules is you never, ever quit on your team, ever. You don't quit on your brothers. You just don't. And you don't make an example out of yourself. So much of what Kyler brought, he brought on himself. And he took down that whole team. He took it down, period. Now, he didn't have help. I mean, obviously, Bidwell couldn't get control of it, which is a common theme. Bidwell's role in this was despicable, in my opinion, or just really, really out of his mind. I mean, the Kime situation was awful. So, I mean, they were contributing, that contract with the Comer clause was bizarre. I mean, the whole thing, the way it came down. And so others are certainly at fault. But with Bidwell and Kime's help, it took the whole thing down. I mean, right there. I mean, no offensive starter was in OTAs, and you got a Super Bowl coming to your building. Your quarterback's not there, and he's looking like he either wants to get traded or shipped out of town. I mean, you don't know what's going on. The drama of that all off season was taxing and emotional. You got a former All-Pro center saying, "I'd just as soon retire." We had a Super Bowl caliber roster in the making there. At certain spots, what they could have improved if the buzz was strong. where you could get in free agents knowing this could be a Super Bowl team. Instead, it took all the buzz out, and it took that whole team down. He took the whole that whole, the head coach down with him. He's gone now, and now he has the gall to say that he had it all figured out better than Cliff, or that he was given suggestions that Cliff never agreed to, or this and that, or he was ahead of the game the way Cliff wasn't. If football gods are listening to that, I think they probably were. They were like, hello, come Washington. They're coming in what, week 3 or 4? That's going to be a really interesting game to watch. And I think a lot of things will be on the line there. I'm sure that Kyler will be hugely motivated, and I'm sure that Cliff Kingsbury will be as well. So let me just answer these, and then we'll get moving. Is it going to be pass first or run? I think it'll be a mixture on offense. I think it'll have to be. It'll be more so this year. But yeah, I think the running game is still, because of the way they drafted in the 3rd round with Raymond and Isaiah Adams, it's going to be still on a par. And then, I think the wide receiver squad will be improved, no question about it, and better utilized. Hopefully, Kyler will be able to throw with more consistent efficiency. That's going to be huge. If that's the case too, you have a good setup. If it's not the case, you have to worry about whether Kyler is the right guy in a Petsing offense. And then from AZ_Cardinals_fan, did Rallis do more with less than Vance Joseph, a much more experienced defensive coordinator? My answer to that is neither of them were great game planners. Vance did come up with a plan to beat the Rams and 49ers, so we've got to give him the edge there. Of course, Vance had the J.J. Watt the last couple of years for a season and a half. He helped develop Zach Allen, who, by the way, we miss a lot. There were some good things Vance did, but he also was terrible at coaching linebackers. Made a mess of things. We should have never gotten rid of Reddick. That goes on and on. I didn't like the way. I'm still not a fan of Collins on the edge, particularly since we've been vulnerable in the middle on linebacker. There's things like that. Wasn't a fan of how they treated Catrell Clark. Wasn't a fan of playing 2 guys scoring and grading in the 30s and 40s for 11 straight games, and Marco Wilson and Josh Woods. I mean, we got two weak links like that on a defense. I mean, it should have been clear way earlier than that they weren't getting it done, and they should have had guys taking their place. But they didn't. Why didn't they do that? I have no idea. So no, I can't. I mean, I'm not a big fan of either one of them. And I hope to be a fan of Nick Rallis. I hope that he's got a stronger plan this year, and it will surprise us. But I'm worried. He's young. He's 31 years old. He hasn't had a lot of experience, and he's only really coached in one defensive system, which was why I wanted to get a defensive advisor that could help out with game planning and stuff. So I'm hopeful, and I like Rallis a lot as a young coach. I do. I just think that he's over his head, but I hope I'm wrong. All right. And then last one by Koala 83. Where do you expect the defense to end up at the end of the season based on exceeds, meets, or underperforming expectations in grading, and why? Well, as we were talking about before, I want to see players improving as the season goes along. I think it'd be fair to expect that the defensive coaches have a kind of season that like Petzing had last year, where younger players and players are being integrated and improving as the season goes along rather than regressing or just stagnating out. So if that happens, then I think, Koala, we got something to be hopeful for, and we got the basis of maybe something real good. But I'll leave you all with one question here. I'll ask Kyle this question to end it. There's a guy out there who really interests me. His name is Mike Vrabel, and I mean, I think he'd be a major coup here if things fall apart this year again. And of course, he's got the connection to Monty in Tennessee. So, Kyle, what's your thought about Mike Vrabel?
That is a former coach of the year. It seemed like he should still be the coach of the Titans. I don't really understand the breakdown of why. A lot of the reporting sounded like he was big and intimidating to the general manager. I know it's more complex than that, but the reporting wasn't very clear about why he isn't the coach of the Titans anymore. But I, that is the best option going into next year, I think. Putting Bill Belichick aside, because that's kind of its own case at this point, like he
Yeah.
would join a ready to compete for a Super Bowl type of team. It wouldn't be a roster turnover type of situation. But Mike Vrabel has put in enough work as head coach of the Titans to earn a second and potentially third head coaching job in the NFL. So I think he would be at the top of the list of available people next year if a head coaching job were to come available. And you raise a great point about the connection to Monty Fort with their time in Tennessee. Perhaps that prior relationship sets us up to potentially have Mike Vrabel join the organization in some capacity, although I agree with you. I think the only jobs he would be taking at this point are head coaching positions and not
Right.
necessarily advisor role type of things like we saw with Marvin Lewis.
See, here's been the pattern with the Cardinals that I think has to change if we're ever going to be serious contenders. Is I don't think hiring Jonathan Gann was a serious hire. He's just so inexperienced, and plus at a penalty of breaking rules and losing a third round pick. I just there's not enough evidence to suggest he's anywhere near the defensive guy that Lou Anarumo is. And he certainly hasn't proved he's a defensive guy the way Mike Vrabel is or Brian Flores. All right. Now, maybe that changes this year, and now we're not even discussing it anymore. But if it's still an issue, I think you've got to. Here's what's wrong is the pattern has been that since Michael Bidwell took over, hire a GM without experience as a GM who you can control. Steve Keim, inside hire would have been so indebted to Bidwell, except that sort of backfired on him because Keim got influenced by BA. We'll get to that in a quick second. I'll recap this quickly. So then Monty Ossenfort, why doesn't he hire a more experienced guy? Well, it makes you wonder, did he want the young guy he can control? Now, how often does that lead to winning in the NFL? I don't think very much. And here's the thing. Kyle brought up a great point. I mean, Mike Vrabel, I can guarantee you he was pissed off for a reason in Tennessee. I know that guy well enough. I grew up around here, around him, to know what he's all about. So if you as a GM can't mesh with someone like who wants to win like that, then you got a problem to begin with. So if Monty Ossenfort's saying like, oh well, I don't know if I can control Mike Vrabel, then we're in trouble. And maybe that's part of the reason why he didn't want to hire Brian Flores. So but when are we ever going to hire people with experience? Right now, we have a GM who's got 1 year experience. We have a head coach who has 1 year experience. We have a offensive coordinator who has 1 year experience. We have a defensive coordinator who has 1 year experience. And you're playing in the NFC West? I mean, how realistic is that? And that's why, I mean, I want to get on the bandwagon with everyone else, but realistically, I don't know how I do that without at least raising these questions. And that's what I'm doing. That's what, and Kyle's given us some good answers, and I hope we'll continue to do that. Kyle, some parting words?
Well, to your last question, I think the job was just not desirable when the hiring process was first going on. Sean Payton turned him down. Brian Flores pulled his name out of contention. Dan Quinn pulled his name out of contention. And those two took defensive coordinator jobs over sticking it out to see if the Cardinals job would come available. So, and that's what happens with a rebuild. Very rarely does the coach who begins the rebuild ever get to see through the fruits of their labor. Dan Campbell is a great exception for how it can work out, but look at Brian Flores. No matter how good Brian Flores could do with the Dolphins, he was set up to fail, and no matter how good of results he could provide, he got fired at the end of the journey anyways. So maybe that happens with the Cardinals. Maybe they turn it around in year 2. There are examples of both, but very often the coach hired for an undesirable job at the beginning of a rebuild rarely gets to see the fruits of their labor through in the rebuild. I hope it works out for the Cardinals coaching staff, because continuity going into year 2 sets you up in a position to succeed, but ultimately the cards metaphorically are stacked against the current coaching staff, given how much of a rebuild it has been that they've had to go through.
Right. Well summarized, and yeah. I mean, as you were saying that, I'm just going like, plus there's the whole Bidwill factor. Do you want to sign up with him as your owner? And then we got to be honest, that's an elephant in a room. And then when you say Sean Payton, I have to laugh inside, because it's just the odds of that ever happening were slim to none, and Slim just left Slam Diego. I mean, it's just a parade. Same thing with Dan Quinn, who, by the way, was rushed in for a second interview just when the Broncos were making their decision. And Brian Flores was leaving the building in the one interview he got. The timing of that. And here's the last thing I'll just plant in people's minds. The reason why you don't hire Brian Flores is you already know he won't want to tank. You already know it. He's got a lawsuit out against the NFL saying that he was bribed to tank games. Instead, you get a guy who obviously seemed very willing and eager to do it. And that, to me, too, is why football gods looking down on that would just go like, that's another unwritten rule. You never, ever coach a game to lose for the sake of your players. Ever, ever. There's no excuse for it. No tanking reason for it. Because, again, it comes down to integrity. How can you look those players in the eye after a painful loss and then act like it's okay? Which in his pressers were like, he was notorious for coming in. Well, we did some good things, and we're, didn't seem to be that emotionally affected by those losses. And that was, in my opinion, very telling. So Brian Flores, you can't hire if you want to tank. And then you'd have to decide for yourself whether that's a good thing you have a coach who wants to or not, and will break NFL rules to get hired. So, all right, we're running late, and I know Kyle's got to go. And but hey, thanks for rejoining us today. And please, any questions or comments, react in the comment section, both at Revenge of the Birds and on YouTube, if you're watching this on YouTube. And next week we have Brett Coleman scheduled for the 18th. So we're pretty excited about that. And at some point, I hope to get Dan Viennes of the Seattle Seahawks podcast with us as well. So stay tuned, and thanks again for the support. And in the interim, may the red rain shower down on you into the red, red sea. Red rain.